Thanks, Dad. For those who don't know me, I think I know most people in the room, but John Landsiedel with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game here in town. And myself and Evelyn are both in charge of managing the caribou, or the Mulchatna Caribou Herd here locally, but it covers most of Southwest Alaska across various segments of the herd. Most caribou herds are cyclic, meaning they rise and fall, and Mulchatna seems to be on like a century time span, and some other herds are on a couple decade time spans, or even shorter than that. One of the first documented population indexes of Mulchatna was in the 1860s by Russian fur traders, trappers, and they were widely abundant across Southwest Alaska. Most people in the room are probably very familiar of when they were at 200,000 and you could hunt them. And certainly some are newcomers to Southwest Alaska where there's been no caribou hunting. So I'm trying to go over everything we do in a year that helps us inform the Board of Game, which directs us to manage this herd. So there's 31 recognized herds across Alaska. Some of them bleed into Canada. Mulchatna down there, the southwest corner, that's a 60,000 square mile area. They don't occupy that entire area right now, but that's where they once ranged, all the way to Lime Village in the northeast. And they used the Togiak drainage a lot 20, 25 years ago, and they even crossed the Kwijak over towards Lake Iliamna. Caribou herds are named towards our calving grounds, where they have high site fidelity, generally speaking, meaning they return to those areas year after year. And so the Mulchatna herd was named for the Mulchatna River, but then when they flew up, they absorbed some of these other outlying groups, most notably the Kilbuck herd, which is on the north side of the Tikchik Mountains, closer to Bethel. So right now, this is our GPS collars that we have on air allow us to figure out kind of exactly where most of the caribou exist across Southwest Alaska. So the bulk of Mulchatna is comprised in two major groups right now, represented by the pinkish color. That's what we reference as the East Mulchatna. And then the yellow or goldish color out west is the West Mulchatna. And there's some movement between those two groups, primarily up towards Nishlik Lake and through that country in the upper end of Woodstick State Park. It varies from year to year how much movement there is in that area. But we also have some fragmented outlying groups that are managed under Mulchatna, but may not be recognized locally as Mulchatna just because of the place name. And so the purple group down there, we worked with Togiak National Wildlife Refuge. And here in 2022, we've radio collared, and then since then we've radio collared animals south of the Connecticut River, all the way out on the Cape Newenham and Cape Pierce. And then additionally, there's some animals over towards Katmai National Park in the green that Evelyn and our counterpart in King Salmon worked on getting radio collars on so that we can try and document how many animals are out there, what their population demographics are, their survival, so on and so forth. So it's important that we have radio collars on air on these animals, and our capture efforts are big efforts once or twice a year, but then they kind of inform every other survey that we do. So this shows the population estimates going back to 74 and then through current. There's been a lot more emphasis here in the last 10 years plus to get population estimates every year because of the importance of the herd and because of their large declines. The gray bars are minimum counts, actual individual animals that we count in photographs, and then the blue bars represent the number of animals we think are missing from those counts. There's error associated with every survey, and so the blue makes up the difference of some of those animals we may have missed. And again, that goes back to radio collars, and I'll go into that survey more in depth. Our current population level for the bulk of Mulchatna, excuse me, is just under 15,000. This July 3rd and 4th, we did our survey. And we estimated 14,486 caribou. We had a minimum count of 12,816. And really they're split pretty evenly across the east and west. And these two segments act very separate or very distinctly separate from one another, even though they do share some overlap in the Tikchik Basin up in the northern end of the park. East Mulchatna spends much more of its time down in the lowland tundra country, in the river basins. They group up really strongly in the summer. They disperse pretty widely in the winter. Their calving grounds are really strung out. And that's in pretty distinct difference to the West Mulchatna out towards Bethel, where they aggregate very loosely in the summer. They're up in the Alpine, up in the Tikchik Mountains on persistent snowpack. And then in the winter, they group up really, really strongly down on the Eek and Queequeg rivers, closer to Bethel, Quinnahock, and Queequeg. There are some caribou that are kind of in-betweeners. We reference them internally as Central Mulchatna. They oftentimes get grouped with the East Mulchatna, but we count them in the summer in between Kulik and Beverly Lakes. Up in the mountains there, we documented 424 animals there.
Hey John, if you want to, you can use the mouse.
The
mouse
reference.
Yeah, and
Okay.
people can see it online.
Okay, so we document and report Mulchatna as these just under 14,500 animals. But again, our management strategy should account for these outlying groups. But just to ease confusion of the public, and there's just a lot of information out there, this population graph is supported by these numbers. And so we closed resident hunting in 2021. But as you can see, our population estimate hasn't varied that much in, if you look back 10 years, those three surveys of 14, 15, 16, they're much higher. And if you only have that as to paint the picture, it looks like, oh wow, we lost 20,000 caribou. And I'll get into some of the nuances of those surveys in a bit, but really our minimum counts haven't changed a whole lot. These are estimated counts. Our minimum counts haven't changed a whole lot in a decade. So in addition to counting the bulk of the Mulchatna Caribou Herd, those other additional radio callers, GPS callers in the outlying groups, Andy Aderman with the Refuge estimated over 600 down here. And then our counterpart in King Salmon with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and Katmai National Park, they do some work out here as well, estimate about 600 animals. And these animals on these outlying groups don't migrate. They have small seasonal migrations, from the coast here on Good News, and they migrate up into the mountains here, but they don't have, 100-mile migrations like the core Mulchatna group does. And then additionally, some locals have mentioned that they've been seeing animals behind Clark's Point, just east of town here. And so when Evelyn and I did our composition survey in the fall, looking at population demographics, we documented 230 animals behind Clark's Point. So across all Southwest Alaska, under the management umbrella of Mulchatna, there's 16 to 17,000 caribou currently. And what that means for the public, just as a rehash, some of you are familiar with this process, some of you aren't. And if you aren't familiar, I'd urge you to become engaged in this process. But the Board of Game really directs the management of the resource because they decide what the desires of the people are, and we make recommendations, and the public can come forward with recommendations on how you guys want your resource managed. There's two local advisory committees, one here in Dillingham, which would be the Nushagak, and Togiak has one as well. But then Mulchatna covers such a large area that it covers two ACs up off the Kuskokwim, Bethel itself, and then Lake Iliamna. And then again, the public can come forward with proposals. We're in our board cycle right now, so we've kind of missed the window for that opportunity to create a proposal, but in 3 years, we'll come back around to it. So through the department and the board, we come up with population and harvest objectives. The current population objective, so the desired amount of caribou on the landscape is 30 to 80,000. Again, we're at that 16 to 17,000 number. Our harvest objective is 2,400 to 8,000 animals, and that 2,400 to 8,000 animals is a percentage of the population objective. So that represents 3 to 10% harvest of the population. If your population is growing and reaching the upper end of your threshold, you want to harvest more caribou. And if you want to maintain the current population level, you harvest lesser caribou. And we use our composition. The composition ratios are really derived to have sustainable harvest strategies and sustainable populations. Is what those ratios are meant for. And what a calf to cow ratio is for every 100 cows we count, we want to see a minimum of 30 calves as well. And then our subsistence program has conducted surveys in Southwest Alaska and how many caribou are reasonably necessary to feed people in Southwest Alaska. And so those numbers are really important and really drive our management of this herd. Currently, we aren't meeting most of them. We aren't meeting our population objectives, and there's no hunting, so we cannot meet our harvest or subsistence objectives. Our calf to cow objectives vary. Some years we don't. The long-term West Mulchatna average is 26 per 100. The long-term East Mulchatna is 31 or 32 per 100. And our bull to cow ratios, they vary as well. Some years we meet them, some years we don't. So in an average year, we capture caribou in March. We capture 10-month-old caribou. Those are short yearling females, or just yearling females. And those allow us to have known age animals on the landscape. And known age animals are important to monitor reproductive success and age at first reproduction. Their weights have long time been a metric of an indicator of nutrition on the landscape. We're kind of going away from some of that now. Parturition survey is essentially a birthing survey. So cow caribou will retain their antlers, or their udder will be distended, or they'll have a cap at heel. And so we can go in, take a sample of caribou. Do they still have antlers? Do they have a distended udder, or do they have a cap at heel? That would be a pregnancy metric. And that's really our also an indirect indicator of nutrition, but also gives us some insight into how productive the herd is currently. Our photo survey is where we derive our abundance estimate, or how many caribou are on the landscape. And then in October, we do our composition surveys, and we've started to do some capture work in October as well. And I added this here just because we really try hard to avoid hunting seasons. We try and not have that perceived or actual conflict of screwing up someone's hunt while we collect this information. So, excuse me, the previous research, there was 10 years roughly of cause-specific mortality study on calves. So a helicopter goes out, they catch newborn calves anywhere from 1 to 4 days old. They put little radio transmitters on them, little collars, much smaller than the collar on this adult. And then they monitor them every day for 3 weeks or so, and then determine what killed that calf. And they monitor them every day so that if something died early on, you didn't have a bear come in and make it look like it was a bear-caused mortality when it was actually drowning. For 3 years, you'll see a gap in some of our data collection, partly because my position was not filled for a while, and we had some research efforts that took away from some of the management stuff. But we had some research bios that looked at summer nutrition of females, and to summarize that, I wasn't part of the research effort, so I don't want to speak in depth to it, but some of the animals were coming into fall in decreased nutritional condition, meaning their summer range was not adequately meeting the demands of all of the caribou. So nutrition is something we're really keyed in on and interested in trying to learn more about. And so currently from 2022 through now, we have 2 research biologists who are animal physiologists coming out, capturing adult caribou, measuring their rump fat, taking morphometric measurements, weighing them, to really see how those animals are capitalizing on the nutrition available on the landscape. That's also tied to a disease component where they're taking blood over time, because brucellosis has been prevalent in this herd for a while. And we don't know how that is currently affecting the population or not. And then also looking at the reproductive success because that disease impacts reproductive viability. So that's something that will go through 2025. Some of the questions that Evelyn and I have is, what is the continued cause of mortality for calves? So we did another cause-specific mortality study this spring on the West Mulchatna on one side of them. We collared 55 calves. 51 of them will be used for any kind of survival analysis. We had 12 die during our study period from various causes. The next big question that hasn't been answered in the last decade of work out here is how many of our calves make it through their first winter? That cause-specific calf mortality study, it wasn't part of their question to look at overwinter survival, and so monitoring efforts stopped in midsummer or early fall. And so we recently just deployed 28 collars on East Mulchatna. And so what we'll be able to do is look at the overwinter survival of the 35 or 36 West Mulchatna calves, still with radio collars on them, and then 28 East Mulchatna calves from 5 months old to 1 year. And then just continuing to look at what our survival and reproduction is. So this is a graph that shows our short yearling weights, those 10-month-old females. The gray bars represent our sample size across both East and West Mulchatna. And this lag here, there wasn't known age females captured. And so we've started to add that back in. And we've had an increasing trend in our weights, which weight or body mass has been linked to increased survival, increased reproductive success, increased offspring survival, so on and so forth. So this is just one little piece of the puzzle that we're trying to put together. So this is our patrition survey. Previous caribou researchers over towards the Canadian border, they looked at what the known age reproductive success of females was and how that may correlate to population growth or not. And so 3-year-old female reproductive success at a 60% threshold or greater indicated that populations were stable or increasing. And if those same 3-year-olds fell below a 40% pregnancy threshold, it represented a decrease or correlated to a decreasing trend in the population. So this is the data from the last 10 years. We've largely exceeded that 60% threshold, but we've really remained stable, if not decreasing. So again, just another piece of the puzzle that trying to answer some of these questions, and it doesn't seem to fit as nicely into Mulchatna right now as it previously did in some of the other herds across the state, but this is something we collect every year. And this graph is going to pop up a lot, but this just shows that we didn't experience growth, but it's relatively stable. Our photo survey has been conducted most years. It occurs in late June or early July. It used to be a really, really big event. I'm sure when Paul, you helped out with it, there were 5 or 6 or 7 super cubs flying around. And so we use our radio collars to track into each group. And then we fly around each group, we take a picture of it. If the groups are too big, we radio in a bigger airplane that has a belly mounted camera, and it'll shoot a picture that straight down from the top, and they can stitch together through GPS tracking. And so the East Mulchatna is usually in this zone 5, and West Mulchatna is more so in this zone 3. But it used to be a really, really big effort, and now we only use 3 airplanes or so to get it done. Part of that's because we have so many GPS collars out there right now. So this is a pretty common aggregation for East Mulchatna. There's 6,500 animals in this picture. This was one group. This was the biggest group this summer, up the Mosquito River. There were 43 radio collars in this group out of 60 some available. And just when you look at this, and then we'll go to the next slide, this is West Mulchatna. And this is pretty uniform West Mulchatna, smaller groups, 20 to 200 animals, 1 or 2 collars per group, spread out on persistent snowpack. And something that hasn't been done in the past, or not at least with Mulchatna, has been to zoom in on these pictures and document how many calves are in each picture. And so we can get age estimates from these pictures, calf versus adult, but it becomes more challenging to separate sex from these pictures in the summer. You can see this is very obviously a bull, and this is a bull as well, but this small bull's antlers versus say a cow's antlers become more difficult to tease out in these pictures. So we do a fall survey to assess how many males and females there are in the population. Yeah.
This kind of goes back before when you were, and the antlers now, when you were talking about 3 indicators that the female is pregnant. Can you say again the antlers indicator?
If they retain their antlers, if the females, adult cows retain their antlers into May, it's an indicator that they were pregnant.
That they were
Or are.
Are, okay.
Sorry, yeah. So this is something we've started to look at, is just how many calves we have in the summer versus how many adults we have. And then also we can more often than not detect the radio collars themselves on these individuals. Going back to this graph again, these surveys, the minimum counts from 2014 and 2016 were very, very similar to minimum counts now, but they missed a bunch of radio collars. And so that led to error in the survey, which inflated some of the population estimates. And it wasn't a bad survey, it was just the technology was different then than it is now. And so they missed some VHF collars that just peaked, they're not GPS collars. And so minimum counts in 2014, 2015 were very, very similar to now, where they estimated, 27 to 30,000 animals. And our current estimate's 14,000 animals. So then our composition surveys are in the fall. There'll be a helicopter. We fly to radio collars. We get down on them low. We identify females by their vulva patch, or bulls and males by their rump and or antlers, and then calves. And we try and sample 30% of the population or better. And this is our bull to cow ratio. And again, these fall ratios they're designed to have sustained hunting, is what this bull ratio is supposed to represent. And so you can see our bull ratio dropped off a little bit here this year, but it's well within the long-term range. And as everyone who's lived here knows, the last 3 winters have been pretty heavy and certainly prolonged. And I don't know if that's leading to an increased number of bulls not making it through the winter post-rut, or what is really driving this. And then our calf to cow ratio, that's really indicative of our future population growth potential. 30 is a number that is supposed to maintain populations, relatively speaking, for most ungulates. Our West Mulchatna has oftentimes not met the objective. East Mulchatna in the last 10 years has met the objective. And then here in the last couple of years, the West Mulchatna has exceeded the management objective for calves. That leads us to intensive management, which is unique to any other state out there. Intensive management really opens the toolbox for managers. The Board of Game identifies populations of moose, deer, or caribou that are important food resources and gives them a positive or negative finding. Mulchatna has a positive finding because they've been so important for food for Southwest Alaskans. Again, the board determines what the people's needs are, and then they direct the department. So we have a positive IM finding, and then I'm just going to go quickly through this section, but Hunting seasons, we don't have a hunting season right now, so we're kind of at a clean slate. And so if anyone has ideas going forward, I'd be happy to hear them, or in the next board cycle, if you have an idea, pitch it in a proposal. But this just shows really liberalized management, up in the Western Arctic herd, which is the largest herd in the state right now, where they can shoot 5 caribou per day. There's 155,000 caribou up there. And we have a maybe announced season, which, it's not announced, so it's not on. Some of the factors we need to think of when opening hunting seasons, is when they're accessible to people. Can you access them via your skiff, or does it have to be a winter hunt? And obviously, you're gonna have more harvest during a good winter with good travel conditions, and certainly avoiding the breeding season with caribou. Mulchatna is likely to turn into a tier hunt. So the federal managers have a rural preference that they can apply to their hunts, where they can say, you live in Dillingham, Aleknagik, Clark's Point, you get permits. Anchorage does not get permits. The state cannot manage. It was found unconstitutional to separate or differentiate residents of Alaska amongst other residents of Alaska. The system that we have that tries to counter that or balance that, the needs of rural Alaskans and their proximity to the resource versus those who live elsewhere in the state, is our tier system. It is likely, it's kind of a messy system, but it's likely the Mulchatna herd will go to a tier system. But for people who hunted Mulchatna for 30 years but live in Anchorage, they're gonna have preference over, say, Tab, who's only been here for 3 years. So it's not a perfect system. And so we need to think about that going forward, and when we do turn a hunt back on, how are we going to manage them? Bag limits, and this is really simple, but when Mulchatna was booming, you shoot 5 caribou, then it went down to 2 caribou. Sometimes if the populations are really good and increasing, you'll allow the harvest of females, so on and so forth, and then all the way down to 1 caribou. And then something the department can't do, but the board does, is they determine allocative measures. And so when the herds are doing really well, they'll oftentimes at a maximum allow a bag limit of 2 bulls for non-residents. But we're so far away from that. But ideally in the future, if non-residents are hunting, it usually means the needs of the residents are being met first. There currently isn't any large scale habitat manipulation that has been shown to be effective for caribou or their primary winter forage of lichen. This is something that I think the refuge has talked about allocating funds to back when Pat Walsh was here, is doing a large scale habitat mapping project, and I don't know where that sits, but it's certainly something we would be interested in but aren't working towards right now. And then predation control, which is something we've done the last 2 years, and sort of the decision-making framework for why we decided to go forward and do that was because of really the 10-year calf mortality study and these two pie graphs, where close to 90% of the mortality of calves in their first few weeks of life was due to predators, and of the predation, 90% of it was due to bears and wolves. And so that was collected by our research bios from 2012 through 2020, 2021. We also have a public wolf control area that's been expanded throughout the years. We permit members of the public to remove wolves via their aircraft. It's not hunting, so they're acting as agents of the state, essentially. And then the department removed bears off the West Mulchatna Camping Grounds for the last 2 years. We removed 175 brown bears, 5 black bears, and 19 wolves total in 2 years. And we've also seen an increase in calf survival in West Mulchatna to 6 months in those 2 years as well. And again, this just goes back to the current hunt structure. Maybe this isn't, it's all under as we look towards the future. Hopefully we have a hunt coming up soon as we experience more population growth. And there's just one registration permit. That's kind of a simple method for the public. But that may not be the most appropriate management strategy going forward. You know, if West Mulchatna is doing really well, you could open West Mulchatna, but not open East Mulchatna, and it would allow for harvest portioned off across the various segments. But there's all sorts of different strategies. Yeah.
How is it that they got to open the peninsula for residents?
So that was repeating the question.
How is that managed? Even though we're just right on.
You're saying it over in Cocknock and Lake Iliamna? So that all falls on federal land, so that complicates things. I mean, that's the shortest way I can say it is it complicates things. It doesn't exist really in any other state, but there's federal land and then there's other lands. And the federal managers can manage the same resource when they're on federal lands versus if they're on state lands. And so those Cocknock animals largely fall within Katmai National Park. We, as a state, manage them under the Mulchatna herd. So if they're on state lands, you'd have to fall under state regulation.
Isn't the top portion of Iliamna federal land or state?
That you're saying up here?
Yeah, yes.
It very well could be, but most of those caribou are down here, which is Katmai National Park. So they passed proposal through the Federal Subsistence Board that allowed them, Katmai, to issue permits for those individuals to hunt.
So how would, my question is, how would we, as communities, get the tribe, you know, have community hunts for each village and set a number,
Sure,
you know?
that's a great question.
Because seasons are seasons.
Yeah,
You know, animals are changing. I mean, this is where the moose go. It'll be more, well, I think it'll be more. If you set the boundaries for each village, to have them choose how much they can catch for their village. You know, set a certain number.
sure.
And then I think that's management, the management wise, you know.
Yeah, I know they have community hunts for moose and caribou over in like Glen Allen.
Yeah, I know they do that further up north too. So.
Yeah, and it's not been talked about with Mulchatna, but I mean, I don't see, really everything's on the
Instead of
table right
moving
now.
it to years. You know.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, we can certainly discuss it. And again, this isn't really the forum for it. We can certainly talk about it, but the Board of Game process is the forum in which those opinions carry weight or more weight. So, Lily, did you have a question?
Yeah, with the zones, we have two different tags for these.
No, this is just an example of something. It would all be one, it would, you know, so they do zones for moose out of Bethel. And really it would be like if the caribou aren't doing well over here, we could shut it off. And if they are doing well over here, we can turn it on, but then that wouldn't affect people in Quinnahock or Queefluck if that, you know, the caribou in Queefluck aren't really available to Gliganick and Newstew. But if they can hunt them over there and they're only managed under one umbrella, we shouldn't have them shut off to Queefluck and Quinnahock, and vice versa. We shouldn't shut the upriver villages from being able to hunt if the caribou herds are doing really well here, but they're not doing well out west. Does that make sense? You know, like it's just a adaptive strategy, I guess. And this is not approved, this is not accepted, this is just an idea.
That night for the Lakers, it just became much worse. I'm Trevor Lane.
So. Yeah, is there any other questions or questions online?
Oh, yeah, you just got one actually in the chat. Who sets the population objective for the size of the caribou herd, and what information do they use to determine the objective of 30 to 80,000?
I think the current population objective was set in 2008, and it's set by the Board of Game. And some of it is using previous population, information. Some of it's using, you know, sometimes there's habitat models that are used, but really the Board of Game sets that number. So, Misa,
What do the agents of the state do with the wool?
skin them, sell them,
So,
yeah. They can.
okay.
They can, yeah. So, no, any of the animals we removed through department control were sent to, if their hides were in adequate quality, you know, wolves in April or rubbing, don't really have much fur value. They were sent to the hide and horn auction, which is an auction in Anchorage. If we permit same day airborne permittees, those wolves are theirs.
You have another question in the chat.
Sure.
Do you see mortalities due to the capture process? And if so, what happens to the carcass?
Very rarely. I don't think we've had a single capture mortality since Evelyn and I have started in 2022. We're both trained in portions of veterinary medicine and are able to administer those drugs to these caribou. It's really safe. Certainly capture is stressful on an animal. There's something called capture myopathy, where the animal's muscles basically just, the stress levels are too much for the animal, but we haven't experienced any of that out here thus far. So, and if an animal were to, oh man, if an animal were to die of capture myopathy, capture related mortality, and it had drugs in it, we would probably make efforts to clean that up off the landscape, because there could be some poor side effects for consuming that carcass, whether it was a bear or wolverine or eagle. So we'd probably try and remove it from the field. But again, we haven't ran into it, so.
Oh, you're done?
No, I don't, yeah, this is it. That was questions.
Oh, all right.
I don't know how much time that is, but.
We got like 10
Jesse.
minutes.
What's your guys' estimated annual harvest size season?
The last few winters, we've documented anywhere from 12 to 25 animals. But that, we certainly miss a bunch. It seems to be more prolific out west because the animals are much closer to communities than most of East Mulchatna is on this side. So it doesn't seem to be significant. I hope not. You tell me, you would know. So, yeah.
How is your herds? Well, I'm saying, I'm asking this, some of your herds migrate south to the peninsula herd and vice versa, you know? Have you noticed something in them? The migration, I know we get a lot of caribou up from the peninsula. And then,
So there's, at one point in time, the Mulchatna herd, Jim Willington, yeah, they moved across the Kwiejak into this country. And this is also the Northern Alaska Peninsula herds range. And then these animals right now, they're under the Mulchatna management structure, but they don't really migrate. They have a seasonal migration where they just go up into the mountains close by and they come back down in the lowland, but they don't migrate like East Mulchatna. This pink, they'll go up towards Whitefish Lake and Lime Village, and they calve in the spring here. And right now they're down in here, and then they can come in winter kind of all around New Stew and Koliganek. We've documented some animals here on the west side of Lake Iliamna in recent years, but certainly nothing that's crossed the Kwiejak or gone over towards Kakanock or, doesn't mean it doesn't happen, we just haven't documented it. Here towards Bethel, I mean, they make a 100-mile migration, and they've from 2012 through 2022, they calved in the Tikchik Basin here. But in 2023 and 24, they stayed on the west side of the mountains. I think there's just too much snow. When we saw where, like, the lead cows were going through the saddles and they hit the lakes up like East Rollick Lake, and they literally were chest deep in snow and turned around and went back and calved down in the tundra. So, yeah, those are our most current population estimates for the various groups.
I was a little bit late for the meeting. What's the goal for the number for we can start subsistence again?
The amount reasonably necessary for subsistence is 2,100.
Okay.
Which is a ton of animals, and I mean, we're not gonna harvest 12% of our herd right now, so, one sec, you had a question?
What is the feed estimates for our area in terms of this part of the Mulchatna herd all the way up north of Koignick?
Feed estimates?
In other words, the habitat.
Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, if the habitat is good, if there's lots of lichen or whatever else they eat.
Yeah.
Then the numbers are gonna be strong.
Yeah.
And if there's not a lot of good food for them to eat, or it's too much snow, then the populations are either gonna move or they're gonna die.
Sure.
And they're plus. And at one time, as we know, there was a huge herd.
Yeah.
30, 20 years ago, there was a monstrous herd of maybe the largest herd documented ever. The Mulchatna herd was the largest it's ever been.
Yep.
And then it crashed pretty quickly, and the explanations that were given were that they ate themselves out and they moved.
Yeah.
Moved up north toward the Custerwood. So in the meantime, you would think that if there's not a lot of caribou eating whatever habitat they were eating before, habitat is pretty much the same, if not better, that in a fair number of years, maybe not that long, food source gets better, animals start moving back in. So I want your comments and thoughts in terms of.
Lichen is their primary winter food source. Our research bio has documented that some animals were coming into fall in suboptimal body condition, meaning their fat to weight threshold was lower than it needed to be, or they had increased mortality and decreased reproductive success based on captive rearing caribou that they measured fat and stuff on. I don't know if we currently have an issue with lichens. That is absolutely true about eating themselves out of house and home. They either moved or they died. We did harvest a fair number of females during the crash in here. We harvested a pile of females, which probably led to the further decline. And it wasn't necessarily just movement, like they just moved somewhere else in the state. Because it's not like Lime Village all of a sudden had 30,000 caribou or something. So we don't have any kind of range quality assessment right now, to answer your question. And so we use body weight, body fat percentage, reproductive success. We use some of these indirect metrics to try and get at what the habitat is currently doing or not.
And have you done recent caribou analysis along that for our Mulchatna?
There's research files working on it right now.
I see. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, yep,
I mean, if they're healthy animals,
yeah,
that says something positive.
yeah.
Hey, John,
Yes, sir.
real quick, also you gotta remember with lichen, the recovery of lichen is very long term. It doesn't come back in 4, 5, 10 years. Often has 50 to 100 years before lichen will actually come back, regenerate. So it's a very slow recovery of lichen, their primary source. That contributes to some of the issues that we have.
Would that be what, 20, 25 years?
So some of them are 20 years, some of them are 80 years,
Right.
depending on the species.
Yeah.
So.
So any concern on that?
You know, I would love, no, that's a great question. I would love if we could figure out some kind of, you know, it's gotta go through the board process, it's gotta go through that whole chain, but it'd be great if at 20,000 animals and growing, if we could offer some sort of very limited hunt You know, we offer moose registration permits, you know, in person only, like our any bull hunt here, it's in person only during this time period. And if we had capped number of Mulchatna tags, they're only available in Dillingham, you know, that becomes problematic for people living upriver. But if they can, you know, if we have a set date and people show up and we've got 400 caribou permits, you know, then that would be a way to offer some sort of opportunity. But if we're at 20,000 animals and growing, I think we'd want to start looking at harvest before too long.
Yeah, again, you know, set numbers for each.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I could do that. It's the reality of it. I mean, I have a framework I have to work within and that the public can participate in. And there are community subsistence hunts under the state structure. And the most familiar one I'm with or know about is over in Glen Allen. But I'd have to tease that out a little bit.
Would we have to go to the board again to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. And if there's a meeting for the board again, when would you be able to all of that information?
Yeah, so we're in our cycle right now. So we'll be at the board with current proposals right now, and proposals happen about a year in advance. So we're looking at basically 2 years before a proposal like that could come forward again.
It's fine, maybe, because there's no real growth right now, so maybe in the next 3 years, if you see an upswing, that might be part of it.
Well, and there's currently Bethel, who they have, you know, half of the herd essentially. Bethel voted, they've got a 4-year moratorium in Unit 18 right now on caribou. And there's a current proposal to have a 3-year moratorium on the rest of the herd in 17, 19, and 9, so that they line up, because it's already been 1 year. So Unit 18 is no hunting for 1 year. Then we'll implement, potentially, if it passes the board, we would have a 3-year moratorium on caribou, which would put us in line for the next board cycle. So, a lot of moving parts.
There's another question online. Do you have a sense of how much the brucellosis is impacting the herd and how prevalent it is in the cows?
The data that we've collected recently, we have 90+% pregnancy rates on both sides of the population, both segments of the population. The brucellosis seems to be more prevalent in West Mulchatna, in the golden polygon. But it doesn't, we don't have any indication that it is causing any kind of reproductive harm right now. Not at a population level. Certainly there are individuals who are affected by it, but we test for it on the captured animals, and there's been anywhere from a 30 to 40% prevalence rate. But we can't test for active infection. So when we draw blood from the animal and we send it into the lab, they can say the animal's had it or not in its lifetime, but they can't necessarily say it's actively shedding the infection, it has it. But our current pregnancy rates are very, very high. I mean, 90+% off of the research animals. We utilize, our research bios utilize bits or vaginal implant transmitters. So about the size of a finger, they get inserted into a pregnant female. When she gives birth, it pops out. It lets us know when the calf's been born. And we had very high success in detecting the bits and live calf births in West Mulchatna. But because our crew was based in Dillingham and East Mulchatna was up towards Lime Village, they ran into weather, and so they were only able to check about half of the bitted animals. But there's no indication that, I don't think we've documented one stillborn or aborted calf yet. And that's what brucellosis does, is it oftentimes causes an abortion, their first pregnancy post-infection. So it's not necessarily their first pregnancy. They could be 7 years old, have given birth to 3 or 4 calves. They get infected at 7. Their next pregnancy is the one that's most likely to be affected. So, well,
How does that compare to other herds in the state?
great question. I think we have higher, the West Mulchatna having a 30% prevalence rate is high. I mean, it's definitely eyebrow raising, and it seems persistent. Like there's active outbreaks, and we've documented short yearlings with brucellosis. Were they a calf, and did they get it from mom and they kind of burned through it already? And was that spread through antibodies in the mouth? Or was that picked up in their first rut period? They weren't breeding, but just through bodily fluids, or was that picked up on the calving grounds and placenta fluids, or? It was surprising that we had short earwings test positive for it, out west. But as far as prevalence rates comparative to Mulchatna and other herds, I don't know. It came, I think the theory of most of Alaska is it came through the reindeer herding. It's transmitted through reindeer herding, captive, non-captive, kind of captive reindeer. But someone had a question back? Yeah.
I have a question.
Our plan is to do it through 2025 in West Mulchatna, so do it again this next spring. And the reason for that is
5-year plan or 10-year plan or 3 years?
3 years, and then assess. And we don't want to be doing it, it's expensive, it's a public resource, we won't be doing it forever. Although our predator control program, the department-led program, happened in about 2% of the whole Mulchatna range. So we weren't removing wolves and bears from everywhere, it was a very concentrated effort.
I'm not against it.
No, I know, I'm just,
I like that, what you guys are doing. I mean, that's pretty alarming about, 90 bears? Or
94 bears the first year, 81 bears this year.
I mean, that's a pretty good job on you guys. Managing the herd, I think, and good for the dead bear in my mind. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's significant cause of mortality for a lot of calves for a bunch of years, so.
and it's not in any way for people that get tagged for bears, either hunting and cabin grounds that are far out the river, so.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we have almost zero, I mean, very single digit hunter harvest success off the calving grounds, just because they're so remote.
Yeah.
You have another question online.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I haven't figured out how to raise my hand here. This is Pat Walsh, and John, great presentation. This is really a good talk you've made here today. I wanted to follow up on your point on the Board of Game not accepting proposals now and won't for the next couple of years. With the fact that there is a proposal submitted to the Board of Game now that addresses some of the very issues you talked to as being timely. Proposal number 29 recommends that the Board of Game establish new population objectives for the Mulchatna herd. And it also asks them to consider managing using this very same zone approach that you mentioned now. So potentially there's an opportunity to begin harvest sooner rather than later if the Board of Game does this. So if people are interested in this, they may want to comment to the Board of Game and ask them to support that proposal. So again, great presentation, John.
No, thanks for the clarification, Pat. There are 3 Mulchatna proposals right now that will be presented to the board. One of them is to adjust the population and harvest objectives from this 30,000 to 80,000 number, and to reevaluate them, make them new, change them, modify them, which, as Pat said, could allow hunting sooner. There's also a proposal that says a 3-year moratorium, and then there's another proposal that is closed season for residents across the range. So that'll all be presented to the board, and we'll see which way they want to go.
And when is that, and how would people?
It's people can provide public comment up until mid-December on each proposal. If you just go to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Board of Game website, if you just Google ADFG BOG, it'll pop up, and there's a whole online form that you can fill out. Or you can attend the AC meetings and have your public comment heard at the local Nushagak or Togiak Advisory Committee meetings, or attend Board of Game in Wasilla January 11th through the 20th. multiple opportunities.
Any other questions online? All right, thank you, John, appreciate it.